No one likes to admit they're jealous. It's unsophisticated, petty. The kind of thing we associate with teenagers and soap operas. We say we're just uncomfortable, just concerned, just paying attention. But jealousy, real, raw, teeth-clenching jealousy, isn't polite. It doesn't whisper. It burns, quietly or loudly. Depends on how practiced we are at hiding it. Carl Jung, that unsettlingly honest psychologist, didn't see jealousy as a flaw to be fixed. He saw it as a signal, not about the other person, but about the self. Your unloved parts, your unclaimed desires, your unspoken fears of being abandoned, unseen, or, worst of all, replaceable. So maybe the question isn't why am I jealous? Maybe it's what part of me feels so small it panics when someone else gets love. Jealousy isn't the villain, it's the flashlight. And what it's trying to show you, well, that's the part most people never want to look at. Part 1. Jealousy isn't about them. It's about the shadow you've been avoiding. Let's start with the most uncomfortable truth. Jealousy is never really about them. Not about the person your partner smiled at, not about their ex, not about the colleague they laughed with a little too long. That's just the surface, the show, the distraction. Jealousy, Carl Jung would argue, is your shadow talking. And the shadow doesn't care about appearances. It cares about what's missing in you. You see, the shadow isn't evil. It's not the villain in your psyche. It's just the part of you you've decided is unacceptable. Too needy, too emotional, too insecure, too much. So you locked it away and tried to be strong, stoic, chill, modern. You told yourself, I'm not the jealous type. And for a while that works, until one day it doesn't. Because the shadow doesn't vanish. It waits. It watches. And the moment someone else has what you secretly crave, whether it's attention, admiration, affection, it lunges forward. Not to punish you, but to remind you, hey, you wanted that too. Remember? Jealousy, then, is like a heat flare from a part of yourself you tried to bury. It shows up when someone else gets close to what you won't let yourself feel entitled to. Maybe you grew up believing love must be earned, so when your partner gives it freely to someone else, even casually, it feels like betrayal. Not because they did anything wrong, but because deep down, you don't believe you're naturally lovable. Your shadow believes you have to fight for affection, that it's a competition, that love is a limited resource, and someone just drank your glass. And so, what begins as a glance or a laugh becomes a crisis. Not in reality, but in your inner world. You feel threatened, not by someone else's charm, but by the echo of your own insecurity. Jealousy isn't your partner's fault. It's your shadow's alarm system. It's screaming, hey, this hurts because we haven't dealt with this yet. Let's take a common example. Imagine a man who sees himself as calm, logical, mature. He prides himself on being above childish emotions. Then his girlfriend compliments someone else's passion, how emotionally expressive they are. And suddenly, something inside him snaps. He doesn't understand why. It's not like she kissed the guy, but inside there's a fire. And that fire, it's his shadow. Because somewhere in his past, he learned that emotionality is weakness. He shut it down, became the rational one, but deep down he wants to be seen. To be admired for the feelings he keeps locked up. When he sees someone else being loved for their openness, it wounds the child inside him who never got that permission. So jealousy becomes a mask for grief, for longing, for resentment at a version of himself he never allowed to live. And here's where it gets even trickier. Most people, when faced with jealousy, try to manage it. They journal, meditate, breathe deeply, or they weaponize it, accuse, manipulate, guilt trip, but rarely do they listen to it. What if, instead of trying to shut jealousy up, you sat with it and asked, what are you trying to show me about me? Maybe you'd hear, I want to feel desirable again, or I'm scared I'm not enough, or I've spent my whole life pretending I don't care and now I don't know how to admit that I do. That's the shadow's voice. Honest, raw, messy. The part of you that doesn't perform, that doesn't posture, that just aches. Carl Jung believed that integrating the shadow, making peace with the disowned parts of yourself, isn't just therapy talk. It's a requirement for wholeness. Because without it, you're not really living. You're performing, and performances are exhausting. Jealousy, in this sense, is a gift. A painful one, yes, but a gift nonetheless. It reveals the gap between who you think you are and who you really are, between the self you show the world and the self you've hidden. And until that gap is closed, you'll keep projecting, You'll keep blaming others for touching your sore spots. You'll call them untrustworthy, flirty, careless, but they're just mirrors. The truth is, jealousy doesn't come from what others do. It comes from what you believe you're missing. So if your partner's attention to someone else makes you feel disposable, ask why you feel so easily replaced. If their success makes you feel invisible, ask what part of you is still waiting to be seen. If their joy makes you angry, ask what joy you've denied yourself. Jealousy isn't your enemy. It's your unfinished sentence, your forgotten need, your exiled voice trying once again to come home. And if you're brave enough to listen to it, not silence it, not shame it, but really listen, you might just learn something about yourself that no relationship book or dating app ever taught you. Because what you're jealous of is what you haven't loved in yourself yet. Part 2. Projection. When jealousy becomes a mirror you don't want to look into. Let's say something a bit uncomfortable. Sometimes the thing we're most jealous of is the thing we're secretly capable of, but don't quite have the courage to admit. Jealousy isn't always about wanting what someone else has. Sometimes it's about being haunted by a version of yourself you buried. A version that maybe felt too needy, too bold, too expressive, too vulnerable. So instead of owning it, you point fingers. This is what Carl Jung called projection. When you can't face a truth about yourself, you throw it onto someone else. It's like watching your internal conflict acted out by other people. You hate how flirtatious your partner is, but only because deep down you long to be that free. You judge someone's ambition, but only because a part of you gave up on your own dreams. Projection is the psychological version of saying, "It's not me, it's them," and then being startled when the universe keeps sending them to trigger you. Now think about that in relationships. One person gets close, and suddenly all your insecurities march to the surface. Not politely, not with a warning, just boom, there they are. You say, "I'm just afraid of losing them," but what you really mean is, "I'm afraid I was never worth being kept." Projection takes jealousy and turns it into a story. They must be doing something wrong. They must not love me enough. They must be comparing me to someone else. Why? Because it's easier to suspect them than it is to sit with the shaky, unglamorous truth that you don't feel lovable in that moment. And who taught you that? Maybe no one did. Maybe it was just the accumulation of small things, neglect, disappointment, rejection, moments that added up over time and hardened into a belief. Love is earned, and I haven't done enough. Here's a strange but important truth. People who are at war with themselves often experience peace as suspicious. They expect betrayal, so they see it where it doesn't exist. They anticipate being left, so they test the other person just to prove they will. Jung might say they're not relating to the other person at all. They're relating to their own internal complexes. Their wounds in disguise. Let me give you an image. Imagine you're looking at your partner, but instead of seeing them, you're looking through a fogged-up mirror. That fog? It's your own pain, assumptions, childhood memories, past betrayals. You're reacting not to them, but to the ghosts behind them. You're jealous of a past they never promised to erase, of a glance they didn't know would hurt you, of a freedom you're scared they'll use to walk away. But here's the kicker. If you don't realize it's projection, you'll try to control them instead of confronting yourself. You'll set rules. You'll ask for constant reassurance. You'll need to know where they are, who they're with, what they said, what they meant. Not because they're untrustworthy, but because you don't trust that you're enough. And as Jung would remind us, what we fail to make conscious ends up controlling our life. Jealousy, when left unexamined, becomes manipulation. It becomes suspicion dressed up as love. But real love requires freedom. And freedom means letting go of the fantasy that someone else can fix your inner chaos just by staying. So here's the invitation. The next time you feel that jealousy spark, pause. Ask yourself, what am I afraid of right now? What story am I telling myself about this moment? And where have I felt this before? You might be surprised by what surfaces. Maybe it's the memory of being ignored as a child, or the sting of a breakup that never really healed, or the feeling of always being second best. Whatever it is, don't run from it. Don't smother it with accusations. Let it speak. Let it remind you that healing doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from understanding yourself. Projection doesn't make you a bad person, it makes you human. But when you see it, you no longer have to be ruled by it. You get to reclaim the parts of yourself you abandoned. You get to rewrite the story. Carl Jung believed that our wholeness depends on integrating what we've disowned. And jealousy, as uncomfortable as it is, can be the compass pointing you back to those hidden rooms in your psyche. The ones you locked long ago because they made you feel weak. But maybe those rooms don't hold weakness. Maybe they hold the very thing you need to feel whole again. So if you're willing, let jealousy be your teacher, not your jailer. Let it show you the places that still hurt, the parts of yourself you've projected onto others, the truths you're finally ready to face. And just maybe, in doing that, you'll stop needing to be loved perfectly and start learning to love yourself honestly. Part 3. The inner child behind the jealous mask. You'd think jealousy belongs to adults. After all, it usually shows up in adult relationships, romance, competition, friendships. But in reality, jealousy is often the voice of a much younger version of you. The part of you that didn't feel chosen. The part that learned love was conditional. The part that sat alone and wondered, what's wrong with me? Carl Jung spoke often about the idea of the inner child, not just in the fairy tale sense, but as a living, breathing presence in the psyche. And this child, though small, holds enormous power, especially when ignored. Now, imagine this. A seemingly confident adult enters a relationship. They're self-assured, composed, rational. They even call themselves low drama. But then something happens, an unanswered text, a subtle change in tone, a mention of an ex, and suddenly that confident exterior begins to crack. Panic floods in, thoughts spiral, they check the phone, they reread messages, they feel a familiar ache, but they can't quite name it. That ache? That's not your adult self reacting. That's your inner child, wide-eyed and wounded, whispering, "Am I being left again?" You see, jealousy isn't just about the present threat. It's about the past pain that threat resembles. The person in front of you may not be doing anything wrong, but your system is reacting to a pattern it's lived through before. Maybe you had a parent who was emotionally unavailable, or a caregiver who gave love only when you performed, or a sibling who always came first. Whatever it was, your nervous system remembers. And the mind? It loves to build stories around the body's fear. So what starts as a small trigger becomes a whole narrative. They're going to cheat. They're losing interest. They never really loved me. These thoughts don't come from nowhere. They come from the protective walls your inner child built a long time ago. Walls made not of bricks, but of beliefs. And here's the kicker. Those beliefs feel real. Not because they are, but because they're familiar. Jung would call this a complex, an emotionally charged cluster of experiences, memories, and perceptions that live in the unconscious and activate under pressure. When a jealousy complex gets activated, it hijacks your perception. You stop seeing your partner for who they are. You see them through the lens of everyone who ever made you feel small. That's why jealousy can feel so out of proportion. It's not about the coffee with a coworker. It's about your oldest wound screaming, "I've been here before," and it ended badly. And the tragedy is this. The more we try to suppress that childlike vulnerability, the louder it becomes. We tell ourselves to get over it, to act mature, to stop being needy, but that inner voice doesn't want to be silenced. It wants to be seen. Let's be honest, most of us never learned how to sit with jealousy. We learned to either explode, accuse, control, demand, or implode, withdraw, numb, shame ourselves. Rarely did anyone teach us to simply be with it, to turn to that inner child and say, "I see you, you're scared, and that's okay." Healing jealousy doesn't mean never feeling it again. It means responding differently when it arrives. Here's where things get interesting. The people we fall for often unconsciously mirror the very dynamics that hurt us. It's not a curse. It's the psyche's way of trying to finish an old story. If you were emotionally abandoned as a child, you may be drawn to people who seem distant. Why? Because a part of you wants to rewrite the ending. You want them to stay. You want to win this time. But here's the danger. In trying to get a different outcome, we often repeat the same pain. Because the work isn't out there. It's in here. With the child who still believes love means proving your worth, that you have to earn affection, that being yourself will never be enough. And jealousy, it's the flare that goes up when that belief feels threatened. So what do? Jung would say we must make the unconscious conscious. That means looking beneath the surface reaction and asking the deeper question: whose voice is this really? What memory is this feeling tied to? And then maybe for the first time we respond not from panic, but from presence. Imagine telling that scared inner voice, I won't abandon you, even if someone else does. You are worthy, even when love feels uncertain. You are enough, even when you feel unseen. It sounds simple, maybe even cliché, but most of us never receive that message. And without it, we keep handing our sense of worth to other people, then panic when they hold it too loosely. Jealousy isn't proof that you're broken. It's proof that something inside you still longs for healing, that somewhere beneath the adult persona, a child is still waiting for the kind of love that doesn't flinch, the kind that stays. And here's the paradox. The more we own our jealousy, not as a weakness, but as a messenger, the less power it has. We stop needing to control others. We stop fearing abandonment like it's a death sentence. We begin to trust that we can survive emotional discomfort without self-destructing. That's real maturity, not perfection, not emotional numbness, but the willingness to sit with yourself when you feel unlovable and not run. So if you feel jealous, don't rush to fix it. Sit with it. Ask it what it remembers. Listen to what it needs, and maybe, just maybe, you'll begin to find freedom in the very place you used to find fear. Because the real threat was never the other person. It was the pain we didn't know how to hold. Part 4. Power, control, and the illusion of safety. Let's talk about control. That seductive, deceptive force we often reach for when jealousy creeps in. When something feels unstable in love, many of us don't reach for trust. We reach for control. We check their phone. We ask loaded questions. We joke about the coworker who texts too late. We subtly punish them with silence. Or we over-explain our own innocence, just to set the tone. And most of us don't even realize we're doing it. Carl Jung wouldn't have been surprised. When the ego feels threatened, when it senses its carefully constructed world might collapse, it tightens its grip. It wants certainty. It wants answers. But beneath all this, it just wants to feel safe. Control is the false promise of emotional safety. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Jealousy is not soothed by controlling another person. It is only temporarily distracted. Because control doesn't touch the root. It only trims the weeds. And when the root is fear, fear always grows back. Think of control as a cage we build for others, not realizing we're locking ourselves inside too. Every rule we create, every boundary we twist into a test, every performance we demand out of fear, it all becomes a prison of our own making. You see, when you try to manage love through control, you are not loving, you are negotiating with your fear. Now, control doesn't always look aggressive. It's not just about shouting, threatening, or dominating. Often it's quiet, subtle, performed through guilt, emotional withdrawal, or self-victimization. It says, I'm not okay, and it's your job to fix it. It sounds like care, but it smells like fear. And the people we love begin to feel that smell, even if they don't have words for it. Carl Jung would probably call this a shadow strategy, an unconscious attempt to protect the vulnerable self without admitting that we feel vulnerable. Because let's face it, vulnerability is terrifying when your self-worth is shaky. When you believe love can only exist if you're perfect, needed, or in control, then being soft feels like suicide. So instead of saying, I'm afraid I'm not enough, we say, why did you like that photo? Instead of saying, I feel insecure and I need reassurance, we say, I just don't trust you. Control gives us something to do when what we really need is something to feel. And society, of course, doesn't help, especially for men. Vulnerability is often framed as weakness. You're told to man up, be stoic, don't get emotional. So when jealousy hits, the only tools left are surveillance and dominance. The inner boy who feels threatened doesn't get comforted. He gets hidden behind performance. And this doesn't just harm men, it starves intimacy itself. Because the price of emotional safety shouldn't be someone else's freedom. True love isn't built on possession. It's built on permission. The permission to feel, to speak, to be fully human in front of another. And jealousy, when approached with honesty, can lead to that. It can be the doorway to deeper connection, not its destruction. But we rarely take that path. Why? Because it's messy. It requires admitting, I don't feel safe in myself, and I'm projecting that onto you. And let's be honest, when was the last time anyone taught us how to say that? Most of us learned to fight for power, not to ask for understanding. We were taught to win arguments, not share insecurities. But power doesn't bring peace, it brings performance. And performing in love is exhausting. Have you ever been with someone who makes you feel like you're always auditioning? Like you're being measured, monitored, managed? That's not intimacy. That's stage fright disguised as connection. Carl Jung might say this is what happens when the ego refuses to admit its shadow, when the part of us that feels powerless insists on pretending it's in control. But the psyche is clever. It knows when we're lying to ourselves, and sooner or later the truth leaks out. Usually in the form of resentment, criticism, or emotional withdrawal. So what do? First, we must recognize that love is not a battlefield, and control is not armor, it's a cage. Every time we try to manage someone else's behavior to feel okay, we are abandoning the one place that truly needs attention, our own emotional landscape. The antidote to control is curiosity. Not, how do I make them stop, but what in me is so afraid of being hurt? It's not an easy question. It doesn't come with easy answers, but it opens the door to transformation. Instead of monitoring your partner, monitor your mind. Instead of managing their behavior, manage your story. Instead of controlling the outside, explore the inside. Because jealousy is not a relationship issue, it's a self-awareness issue. When we stop trying to control others, we can finally begin to care for the parts of us that feel unsafe. We can parent the inner child. We can listen to the shadow. We can integrate the fear instead of feeding it. And the irony? When you no longer need control, you finally experience freedom, in yourself and in love. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." Control is the fantasy of light. Vulnerability is the work of darkness. One feels powerful, the other is powerful. And in that power, jealousy begins to change. It no longer says, "I need to own you." It whispers, "I want to know myself better through you." That is the beginning of a different kind of love. One not built on fear, but on freedom. Part 5. When you stop fighting jealousy and start listening to it. So what happens when you stop seeing jealousy as the enemy and start treating it like a message? Not a comfortable one, sure, but a necessary one. What if instead of judging it, suppressing it, or moralizing it away, you sat down with your jealousy like it was an awkward guest in your living room and said, "Okay, what are you trying to tell me?" Because here's the paradox. The more we fight jealousy, the stronger it gets. The more we shame ourselves for feeling it, the more power it holds over us. But when we're willing to be honest, not dramatic, not performative, just quietly honest, jealousy transforms from a storm into a signal. Carl Jung believed that our emotions, especially the uncomfortable ones, are roadmaps to the unconscious. They're not obstacles to our growth. They are the growth. And jealousy, of all things, is one of the most direct routes to our unmet needs. You see, jealousy doesn't arise in a vacuum. It's not random. It doesn't just show up because your partner liked someone's Instagram post or smiled too long at the waiter. Those are just triggers. Jealousy itself is ancient. It's built on layers: fear of abandonment, fear of being replaceable, fear that someone else is better, fear that you are somehow unworthy of lasting love. And all of these fears trace back to something deeper: your relationship with yourself. When you feel secure in your worth, jealousy doesn't vanish. It just stops defining your reality. You can feel it rise like a wave, but you don't have to drown in it. You can say, "Ah, there you are," instead of, "Oh my God, I need to fix this immediately, or everything will fall apart." But to get to that place, you have to listen to jealousy. Not as a dictator, but as a wounded child. Jealousy isn't toxic. Repression is, projection is, acting out without reflection is. But the emotion itself, it's just a signal flare from the parts of you that don't feel safe. Think of it like this. If your jealousy had a voice, what would it say? Not the shouting, not the accusations, but the trembling truth underneath. Maybe it would say, "I'm scared of being alone," or "I never felt chosen growing up," or "I've always felt like love is conditional, and I'm waiting for the moment I mess it up." That's not weakness. That's the root. That's the gold Jung talked about hidden in the shadow. The part of yourself you buried because it didn't fit the mask, the persona, the story of who you think you're supposed to be. And once you hear that voice, truly hear it, you have a choice. You can still act from fear, still try to control, still lash out or shut down, or you can offer compassion to yourself. It might look like pausing before you accuse, taking a walk before you text, journaling instead of spiraling, saying to your partner, "I'm feeling a little jealous, and I think it's because I'm scared. I don't need you to fix it, I just need you to hear me." That level of self-awareness doesn't just shift your inner world, it transforms your relationship. Because here's what happens when you listen to jealousy with presence. You stop blaming and you start relating. You stop seeing your partner as the problem and start seeing them as a mirror. You stop turning love into a battlefield and start using it as a laboratory for healing, not wounding. And maybe that's the real function of jealousy, not to warn us about others, but to wake us up to ourselves. Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." Jealousy is irritation turned inward. It pokes at our insecurities. It forces us to look at the stories we tell ourselves about love, worth, and identity. And most of those stories aren't ours. They're inherited, taught, absorbed by osmosis from parents, culture, media, trauma. Stories like, "If they really loved me, they'd never be drawn to anyone else." Or, "If I were more attractive, more interesting, more enough, I wouldn't feel this way." But love is not a competition, and attraction is not betrayal. Desire is complex. People are layered, and you too have moments where your gaze wanders, not because you don't love, but because you're human. Jealousy reminds us that love is not ownership, that even the deepest connection cannot be maintained through surveillance or fear. That trust isn't the absence of temptation, it's the presence of choice. When you listen to your jealousy, you don't become weaker, you become wiser. You realize that your partner is not responsible for healing your wounds. You are. You stop demanding constant reassurance and start building inner stability. You move from emotional dependence to emotional sovereignty. That's not to say jealousy disappears, it doesn't. Even the most evolved humans still feel it, but they relate to it differently. They don't act it out, they invite it in. And in that space, something remarkable happens. Jealousy stops being a threat and starts being a teacher. It teaches you where you still seek validation, where you don't yet feel whole, where you confuse attachment with affection, where your inner child still aches to be seen. And in that painful, beautiful process, you begin to love differently, not from hunger, but from wholeness. Because ultimately, jealousy isn't asking you to fix your partner, it's asking you to face yourself. And when you do, when you really do, you might just discover that the love you were afraid to lose wasn't the love you needed. It was the love you were still learning how to give, starting with yourself. Maybe jealousy isn't the ugly flaw we've been taught to hide. Maybe it's just an emotion, messy, misunderstood, and full of meaning. Not a sign that love is broken, but that something inside us is still waiting to be seen. Because at the heart of jealousy isn't hatred, it's longing, the longing to matter, to be chosen, to feel safe in a world that constantly whispers we're not enough. And instead of silencing that longing or judging it, what if we just listened? What if we let jealousy be what it is? A little alarm bell from the soul, asking us to come home to ourselves. Carl Jung didn't promise comfort, he promised transformation. And transformation by nature is uncomfortable. It scrapes away the illusions. It pulls shadows into light. It demands honesty, especially in love. So if jealousy visits you, don't slam the door. Ask why it came. Ask what it needs. Ask what it's trying to protect. And remember, the bravest thing you can do in love isn't to never feel jealousy. It's to feel it and stay anyway. With openness, with curiosity, with compassion for the trembling parts of yourself that are still learning what love truly means. Maybe that's where the real relationship begins. Not between you and another person, but between you and your own truth. And maybe, just maybe, that's the kind of love that never needs to be defended.